Hello, folks. Hi, everyone. I'd like to begin this right in the spirit of South Africa by greeting you in isiXhosa. Moloweni. Hello, everyone. Wamkilikiwi. Welcome. My name is Rebecca Thorne. I am the office manager, customer service specialist here in the counseling center at Shoreline Community College. It is not only my pleasure, but my honor to introduce Dr. Ernest Johnson, affectionately known as Doc, or Dr. J to many, a professor here who teaches multicultural studies at Shoreline. Today's discussion regards South Africa, a topic Dr. J knows well, considering he's led 4 study abroad trips there to date. He is currently planning his 5th, this trip taking place this coming August through September as part of a proposed critical analysis of multicultural movements in South Africa and the United States. Dr. Johnson is a professor of, as I've mentioned, critical multicultural studies in the Equity and Social Justice program at Shoreline Community College. He is also an adjunct professor in the American Ethnic Studies at the University of Washington. Doc earned his Ph.D. from the University of Washington's Department of Linguistics, his MA degree from the University of Khartoum, Institute of African and Asian Studies, and his BA degree in psychology from the University of Hawaii. As a former participant in the South Africa Study Abroad program, I can say with confidence that this experience changed me, and deeply. South Africa has and continues to wage her own wars concerning race and true equity among all peoples. To be physically present there, to be a witness to the long-told stories of activism, pain, resilience, loss of life, and hope in the face of brutal white supremacy is a gift that is beyond words. I learned how much power I personally had to affect change and what it truly meant to examine the intention versus impact of my own inner biases. In today's turbulent times, please believe me when I say that this is not an experience to be missed. Before I turn this program over to Dr. J to speak more, I've been asked to mention a few housekeeping items. Emergency exits are in the back of the room where you entered, and to my right. We are recording this event for later viewing, so please use the microphone that will be brought to you during the Q&A session if you do have a question. Also, before you leave, please take a moment to give us some feedback on the survey that is located in your program. And now, please join me without further ado in giving a warm welcome to Professor Ernest Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. What a wonderful introduction. You know, I'd like to meet that person sometimes. That's like amazing, amazing. Yeah, so I'm happy for this turnout, and we have some slides for you to watch. Really, the purpose here is a dual purpose. One is to advertise the program, give you a little bit of information about what we've covered. I also want to specifically look at the pedagogy for this current trip, which will be from August 22nd or so until September 22nd, roughly. So let's get going. Thank you for turning. Yeah, so what you're looking at here on the screen, and I don't know if we need all this light. Oh, we do for the filming, right? Is the most recent trip. I've done 4 in 2015. This is a group. That happiness on their face really is nothing that's contrived. They really enjoyed themselves, this group, and the South Africans enjoyed them. And this was this was Becca's group who just introduced me. She was a large part of that. But we had a lot of interactions with South Africans while we were there. We made it a point to allow the students to go into elementary schools, to go into high schools, to go to colleges, universities, and to interact with people. And what they gained from that was personal stories, personal interaction. They also were able to do homestays as well. And so, yeah, come and join the fun. This is a part of a group. It's half of the students that went in 2008, which was the trip just previous to that one. This group is very memorable to me. Some of you might recognize at least one of the persons there. 4 of them Shoreline students, 1 a student from UW. All of them gone on to do really wonderful stuff with their lives. I'm really so proud to be associated with these powerful women. And that was a reunion in December 2015 at my home. We're still all very close. This was the group prior to that, which was 2006. It was a small group of 6, all women, all Shoreline students, and very interesting dynamics in this small group. But we explored South Africa, and you can see the beauty of South Africa in the background. That's Camps Bay. It's one of the luxury areas just in the suburbs of Cape Town. And the map that you're looking at here is just, that's the Indian coast. They call it the Garden Route. So when we leave Cape Town towards the southern tip, we move along the Indian Ocean, and we stop at various cities along the way. In 2015, we went to an archaeological dig along the way. And so there's a lot of different dimensions to the program, and there's something for everybody in these trips. A little too fast. And this was the original group in 2003. We stopped in Brussels that year. Last year we went through Dubai. Prior to that we went to England and another time to France. And so it's always been a different stopping point. We don't fly straight through because it's 21 hours. And so we always cut it in half, stop somewhere in between. The gentleman here is a Sudanese brother of mine. I lived in Sudan, got my master's in Sudan, and I have Sudanese family, most of them in exile all over the world, and some of them just happened to be in Brussels, in London, in France, in Dubai when we arrived there. And so he showed us around Brussels and allowed us to stretch our legs. These students also have gone on to do a number of amazing things. I won't go into all of that. But that's Cape Town. That's where we're going. Indian Ocean on this side, Atlantic Ocean on that side. This is the city itself proper here. And we explore this entire area, and then we go out along the Garden Route up into what they call the Seskai and Transkei in local terminology, but Western Cape and Eastern Cape. So the program, part of it is linguistic, and as Becca started out with, we do try to do some rudimentary OSA so that people can communicate. This goes a long way with our students, so it seems that many of the students that go there from different places don't learn the language. The area that we're talking about here, this green area, this is a linguistic map of Africa. There's basically 5 major language families in Africa. And the 2 that we're going to be interacting with in particular is the Bantu here, this kind of brown area, and then the Khoisan people. The Khoisan people are fascinating people. They are identified as possibly being the progenitors of all of humanity. Their genetic markers are the only ones that they found that could actually have produced all of the markers that you find in the human race. They're fascinating just at that level, not to mention that the Osa, who we spend a lot of time with, are kind of a mixture of Khoi and Bantu culturally, and so it's a hybrid culture, and it's really, they're fabulous things. One of the joys of this program is really being able to interact with the people and to also examine some of their rich culture and also look at the parallels between U.S. history and South African history. And that's what this program is going to do in particular. So we're going to start back with colonialism. We're going to do some comparisons of the early settlements by the Dutch in South Africa, and look at the early settlements by the English in Virginia. We're going to talk about some of the same types of constructions of indigenous people in South Africa that occurred also in Virginia. We're going to talk about the displacement of indigenous people from their land. We're also going to talk about the resilience of these peoples and the survival of those people. It's very interesting that the indigenous people of South Africa and the indigenous people of North America have about the same percentage in their population, which is just over 1%. And there's a reason for that. So we're going to explore those reasons. Somebody lived in these places before we got there, and these are San people of the Khoisan here, and indigenous folks here in America. These are folks that, you know, they were the custodians of the land when Europeans arrived, and it's their cultures that have been displaced, but it's also their cultures which are inform our understanding of the place that we're in now. So connecting with those stories and with those cultures is really important, and that's part of what we're going to be doing on this journey. The Khoisan people are the people who are the likely progenitors of not only Africans, but also Europeans and Asians. Those are the Khoisan. That's what we'll go look at. And their culture is fabulous. The British call them like Bushmen and Hottentots. They use these derogatory terms and so forth because they had to, I suppose, justify their displacement and genocide against the people. And so you degrade them by calling them these terms. But the people have a rich, resilient culture that withstood all that has been brought to them, and we will definitely look into it. The English and then the Dutch placed the indigenous people whose different major ethnic groups are indicated here into homelands similar to reservations. They called them independent nations. They were not independent. They were not self-sustained. They were marginalized in areas of the country similar to the ways in which Native Americans were marginalized in this country, where they couldn't sustain themselves, yet they have survived. And so we do spend some time in the Seskai and in the Transkei area. I was telling you about the, what was I telling you about? Yeah, the Seskai and the Transkei is the land of the Xhosa. And so we do spend quite a bit of time with them. My coordinator, my on-site coordinator from there is a Xhosa person, Moss. He's a high school teacher in one of the townships. We visit townships in Cape Town. We do homestays where the students actually shadow the matron of the house that they're staying with. And so they learn something firsthand of the authentic aspects of South African culture. This is a very important aspect of the program. But it's also the parallel between what happened to indigenous Africans and what happened to indigenous Americans is very informative, and we're going to explore that. We're going to explore it with our lens. We're also going to be working with some performance art groups from Port Elizabeth who will help us see it from their perspective as well. So that's part of what the program entails. Slow down. Yeah, and also misrepresentation and stereotypes were part of the process of colonization and displacement. We're going to be looking at ways in which indigenous people have been misrepresented in the media and so forth. We're going to be looking at how, you know, religion was misused to justify colonialism, both in South Africa and here, using things like the Hamitic curse, the idea that Noah cursed his 3 sons and magically one of his sons became an African, the progenitor of the Africans. That was Ham, and they were supposed to be, according to that narrative, cursed to be slaves of his other sons. Well, that's a theory that we will not pursue in any great depth, but it's interesting to look at the fact that that type of ideology is found both to justify the treatment of Africans during slavery and the displacement of Africans in their homeland in South Africa. Yeah, so there was religious misuse of religion to, say, justify and encourage people to come and to settle in Jamestown. Where are Ernest? Yeah. So we have here Robert Johnson telling people that if they go to Jamestown, that they will receive both spiritual and financial rewards. What he's trying to do is to get poor, downtrodden English persons to hop on a ship and go and settle the Americas, right? And yeah, the outcome of that is here we are. It turned out pretty good for Americans, not so good for the English overall. Well, that's another story. Right, but misusing, I would say, the Bible to justify colonization. Here you have in Puck an indication of a Boer. He's a Dutch person who fled the oppression of the British in the Western Cape and went on treks into the Eastern Cape and northern parts of the countries. And one of the things that they did is to justify their displacement of Africans and taking their land and so forth was that these people were in fact constructed by God to be our servants and slaves. That was part of the thing, and that's that. Again, going back to the Hamitic curse of Noah's sons, and that's Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham is, of course, supposed to be the progenitor of the Africans. I called it magical because it's really interesting that Noah would have, this variety of sons, so I suppose it is possible. But so you also have this great trek that happened in America and also happened in South Africa. So you've got the chance to look at the Dutch running really from English oppression and moving into other areas of the country so that they can be free and independent. In the process of doing that, they're going into an area that's already inhabited by Africans, by the Xhosa, by the Zulu and others. And those people, and then you have conflict and warfare between them. You find similar things. How many of you are familiar with the movies of the cowboys and Indians, right? And the covered wagon. Well, that's what this is here. That's people going on the Oregon Trail, many times leaving out of Missouri and heading towards the west and going through Indian country. And the Indians taking exception with people coming through their country and settling the land in their country, right? Which they should have a right and title to. So this idea that indigenous people didn't have full title to their land and that they could be displaced and that treaties and agreements could be made with them and then broken, that's part of the process. It happened in South Africa. It happened in here. It's part of the colonial method. We're going to examine it and look at some of the modern repercussions of that, which will take us to looking at the U.S. and looking at the fact that from Jamestown here in 1607, by about 1720, all of the indigenous people have been displaced from the coast. That type of displacement also happens in South Africa. I won't go into all the details, but this idea of displacement we can look at, and then the justification of displacement is another aspect of it. How do we justify coming into an area and displacing people? We're also going to be able to look at white supremacy head on, how whiteness was constructed in South Africa to justify the settlement and displacement that went on in and around Cape Town, and then as the Boers moved out of Cape Town into other parts of Africa. Also, that construct as applied to displacing indigenous people from their land, particularly the 5 tribes which were forcibly moved to Oklahoma in the Indian removal policy, and also which justifies the attempts to exclude Africans in South Africa. Notice their flag, compare it to the Nazi flag. We're going to look at some of that symbolism. It also has resulted in attempts to exclude. This one's an anti-Muslim rally in the States. And this is a scene taken from, I believe, the protest around trying to remove the monuments to these Confederates who fought really to uphold the right to hold people in bondage and degradation. And so the fact that we can make parallels between that, also in South Africa, they have still a lot of monuments to the English and to the Africans in downtown, to the English and the Dutch in downtown Cape Town, and so we can look at that. We can look at the absence of monuments to black people until Mandela, until the 1990s. There were essentially none. A really small marker where there used to be a slave market you'd find in Cape Town. So we're going to do things like that, explore and do that comparison and contrast, look at symbolism. We're going to have a chance to explore the support of the South African Nationalist Party, which introduced separatism and their support for Hitler in the 1930s, and then them coming into power in South Africa in 1948 and instituting white supremacist practices. They called them apartheid. Some of you may be familiar with that. They introduced signs of whites only, segregating the society, similar to the signs that you found in places like Selma, Alabama, where you would have white-only signs. You would have signs like this: no dogs, Negroes, Mexicans, sometimes Indians allowed. So the parallels are really there to be explored. We really haven't spent enough time on my previous 4 programs doing this, so we're going to devote more time to it this time just to do something a little bit different. So yeah, come on board. We're going to be looking at that. A few more, and then I'll try to leave some time for talk. Yes, so there's then again a resistance to apartheid that really is instituted in 1948. And the movement was originally a nonviolent movement organized by the African National Congress, first under Luthuli and then under Mandela. And this is Tambo, Oliver Tambo, who was one of his deputies. And they are men who really had the vision of how to resist apartheid in a way that was going to eventually be effective. They didn't always agree with each other. We're going to do some parallels between them and some of what happened in the States. So there was a strong student movement in South Africa. Maybe some of you heard about the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. Anybody heard of that? Well, this is where students were shot down and killed. It was roughly some of the numbers are like 67 people killed. The numbers are around, and 3 times that number injured, shot down essentially by security forces and police. And you had also protests at a similar time in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s in the U.S. Students were at the forefront of that as well. So we're going to look at the student movement, how students participated. And I'm talking about students from the grade school level right up through college and university participated in movement, both in South Africa and here. And I think that's going to make for a very fruitful comparison. When we talk about movement, though, we're going to be talking about the reaction to movement. These are coffins from the students at Sharpeville here. And so the South Africans were very intent upon maintaining their system, maintaining their supremacy, maintaining the apartheid policy that they had in place. And if it meant shooting students down, then they did that. Of course, there's a reaction to this. When you kill children, then people become more outraged and more determined. And so there's that dialectic process that happened both in South Africa and happened in the States. When people saw water cannons on children here and dogs sicked on children here in Alabama, in Mississippi, in other places in the South, that changed their mind, changed their level of intensity in the struggle, and also changed the nature of the struggle. Some people became less nonviolent. That means violent. Yeah. So also you have a series of laws that were introduced to uphold apartheid, similar to the miscegenation laws that we have in the South here. You had the Immorality Act in South Africa. You had the prohibition against mixed marriages in South Africa. Well, you had that in America as well. Some of those prohibitions were in place until very recently in some southern states. Mm-hmm. Loving case, yeah. The movie Loving is something that you should see in Virginia. The case there. We're going to have a chance to look at some really amazing leaders on both sides of the pond. And so, you know of Dr. King's story. One of the interesting things is that they were contemporary in their struggle. Dr. King is the president of SCLC from 57 to 68, and Albert Luthuli is the president of the ANC before Mandela between 52 and 67. They both were nonviolent men. They believed in struggle without violence. They had that in common as well. And they both also were Nobel Peace Prize laureates and deserved to be so. 2 of the 4 laureates that came from South Africa. It has had a disproportionate number of laureates in the world, actually. Yeah. So what else? Yeah, so we're going to explore these comparisons. You know, we're going to look at these folks. We're going to look at Malcolm X. We're going to look at Steve Biko. Steve Biko is the father of black consciousness in South Africa. He has a complete center in Port Elizabeth. King Williamstown, actually. Isn't it? King William? Yeah, I think it's in King Williamstown. We usually get to it through Port Elizabeth. But we've done some things with them, and we're really excited about it. We want to go back there and explore that. Of course, the similarities in the fact that leaders were killed on both sides. You know, we had murder of Dr. King, of Malcolm X, of Steve Biko. One of the things we do while we're in South Africa is we visit the jail cell of Steve Biko in Port Elizabeth. We visit the jail cell of Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. And we look at the trajectory of the 2 men from their early lives through their politicization period, through their early movement, and how they continue to evolve in their thinking and their strategies during that time. I'm real big on that evolutionary aspect of folks. So we're going to do some of that. And then, you know, people got frustrated with the nonviolent approach. That happened in South Africa. That happened here as well. The South Africans, they were the majority by far. Black South Africans are over 75% of the population in South Africa. The whites now, I think, the statistics, they're just a little over 10% of the population. And so you had 10% of the population ruling. So there was real frustration and also a greater capacity for struggle for black South Africans than, say, for African Americans here, a violent struggle. But there were people that took up arms for self-defense here, like the Panthers. One of the interesting things that happened is I met some of the members of the MK, that's the military wing of the African National Congress, and they were doing work in their communities where they were providing health care and education and nutrition to children. And I asked them, I said, did you get this from the Panthers? And they said, the who? They hadn't heard of the Panthers. But they both had similar types of programs. Their programs primarily were to outreach to uplift their community, and in the process of that, they were politicizing the community as well, teaching them to resist. And you found that on both sides. You found it in South Africa, you find it amongst the Panthers here, and so the comparisons are very interesting, and to some degree, they are spontaneous. One is not informed by the other, which I find really interesting. Just a few more, just to give you an idea of the other aspects of the program. Not all of it is political. So, everything's political at some level, but this is the, what they call the colored quarter in Cape Town, Bocap, and it was the one area that didn't experience, let's call it urban removal. So in South Africa, you had basically whites, coloreds, Asians, and blacks, right? There's a lot of complexity between those 4 categories. And the so-called colors or Malay lived in this region, just in a section of Cape Town. And all the other areas, there was urban removal where people were taken outside. Many of them had to go back to the homelands and displace. Some went into townships, but this one retained. And so we go in and look at what it could have been. And then we go to the areas where there's only like these overgrown streets where people were removed, and let students kind of do a comparison between what was and what could have been. And so this is a fascinating, it's a very colorful and a very exciting area of town too, very diverse area of town. It's right next to downtown. We do that. Yeah, there it is. This is Mandela Cell. One of the interesting things about Madiba, his affectionate name Cell, is that the docents in the museum, it's now a museum, Robben Island, and the docents are former prisoners. And so it's just mind-boggling to go in and listen to these men say, well, yeah, well, this is where I used to sleep, and Madiba used to stay in this cell, but we used to have this and this going on over there. So it's unlike any museum I've ever been in before. It's really mind-boggling and life-changing just to travel out there by ferry, and then to experience the stories of these docents and to actually see this place where Mandela stayed for a good portion of the 27 years he was incarcerated. And of course we have to look at some animals, right? It's Africa. What would Africa be if you didn't look at animals? So I minimize that, right? Because, you know, there's an overrepresentation of animal life in Africa, in the sense that Africa is often represented by animals in people's imaginations, and we do try to resist that. So when we do go to game resorts, and we do one, we also look at the impact of the resort on human beings. So we're as interested in the elephants as we are. It's the largest elephant park in the world. It's just mind-boggling, and there's all kind of other stuff there, rhinoceros and zebras and stuff, but we've been surrounded by elephants. I think that was your group in 2008 where the elephants surrounded the vehicles and they were going to water. Yeah, I still get chills just thinking about that. So that's a long story. But yeah, so we look at the impact of the game resorts on the humans in the area as well, and that becomes interesting. We get a lecture from the warden or something on that. And then we do a lot of outreach in this area. For instance, the orphanage that we have a connection with is also in Addo, where this park is, and we go and visit the children. We do some exchanges and get to see some of the beautiful work that's being done by South Africans to kind of reach out to communities that are more disadvantaged than their own, to kind of uplift them. A lot of that good stuff going on. And lastly, take some questions. No, there. Yeah, that's the 2015 group. Again, this fella here, his name is literally Prince, and you would have believed it. I mean, he had a lot of attention when he was there. Yeah, and so, yeah, so the students get that opportunity to go into the high schools and so forth, and they're just excited to have these Americans there. And then, you know, I usually have a really diverse group, international students as well. This is Lin Chi. Yeah, and, you know, a wide spectrum. There's Becca up there who introduced me. This is her group here. And you see, that's the group up there, quite diverse, and it's a great experience for everyone. So I'll open it up for questions. I think that's all I had to present. Thank you.
If you just raise your hand if you have a question, we'll bring a mic to you. There's someone over there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jake. Pleased to be part of your throng.
Thank you for coming.
Good to be here. Well, I was a Fulbright lecturer in Zimbabwe for 6 months in 1989, so we got a picture of Zimbabwe looking down their nose at what was happening in South Africa at the time, but now the story is reversed, as you know. But I was curious, you mentioned the largest elephant park. I realize this is not maybe central to your emphasis, but what is the name of that largest elephant?
It's called Addo, A-D-D-O.
A-D-D-O, thank
and
you.
it's just outside of Port Elizabeth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Dr. J.
Hi.
Excuse me. I recall after the apartheid was overturned and the land was retained a lot of the land. It was the reconciliation thing and
Yes.
everything. But I recall a few years after that, they were interviewing some young white students.
Yes.
And they were talking about affirmative action, and they were complaining about how these black students were, getting over them. And that's very similar to what happened
Right,
here, and I'm just
right.
curious, do you know what it's like now? Is it still the resources not as distributed?
Yes, that's still a problem. South Africa went on a course that is different from many African countries and many colonized countries. And what they did is that Mandela and part of his inner group decided that instead of forcing the whites out or fighting a bloody war that was going to kill nearly everybody, they would try to live together in a multicultural society with protections under a constitution that protected the rights of all people. The South African Constitution, for instance, protects the rights of the LGBT community constitutionally. Protects the rights of women constitutionally. Not to say that it's practiced perfectly, but just to have it as constitutional law takes them a long ways towards the actual implementation of it. So the question about the current climate, I can tell you a story. I met with Rotary clubs when I went to South Africa, and their Rotary clubs, the Rotary clubs we met with, the one we met with in Newlands, it's a very kind of upper class Rotary club. And they were nice enough to take us on a tour all around the Southern Cape. They fed us, and then we had a chance to interact, and I was sitting with different members of the clubs, and I had conversations with them, and they're older gentlemen. And their conception of South Africa shocked me, because I expected them to have more of a kind of multicultural appreciation of things, but they didn't. And they were very frustrated with the Xhosa in power. They felt that they were incompetent. They felt that they had all of these stereotypes and tropes. And when I would try to explore it with them, they got frustrated with me and, you're an American, what do you know about what's going on in our country? They became one of them became rude, not all of them. They were generally really quite gracious and not rude. But, so that was a little bit of feedback. And then we went with the son of one of them. This guy was English. He was cool. The other guy who was really rude was also English. But he was cool, and he said that, my son plays in a band, and he's playing, would you like to go to his set? So all of us, the group, after we had dinner, they fed us dinner, we went with the son to the place where he was going to play. And we wanted to walk through the area we lived in to the area that he was in, and he was very hesitant to do that. So the story, basically what his position was, is that it's unsafe to be on the streets in this neighborhood because there's too many black and brown people in this neighborhood. That was his thing. He lived in the white suburbs. And the way that story turned out is that he saw somebody coming down the street, and he wanted all of us to cross to the other side of the street because he was sure that guy was up to no good. Come to find out, that was one of his college classmates who was walking down the street, right? So there are still a lot of stereotypical ideas that exist, and you would expect to find them. The younger people, I believe, are much more able to change quicker than some of the older generations, right? That's just time on task, right? Time on task. And so there's hopefulness. At the same time, there's there's really folks that are locked into the past at the same time. And if you talk to like young African men from the township, and I was also instructed that whites are also Africans in South Africa. That was another lesson that I had, and I accept that. But black Africans from the townships, the young men, highly frustrated. Some of them have prof tech degrees or college degrees. They can't find work. They're still living in a shanty with no electricity and no running water, right, with a degree. And then you have people that are kind of living in the suburbs and they think things are moving way too fast. So it depends on your positionality in the society. But South Africans' experiment at reconciliation is another one that gets a lot of criticism, where they decided that if people who were part of the apartheid regime would confess what they had done, right, and ask for understanding, if not forgiveness, for what they had done, it would be granted to them, and they could live together. But that process was very uneven. The majority of the people who sought reconciliation were the Africans. The only 20% of the people who sought reconciliation were whites. And so it didn't work as it was imagined to work, but just, I think it was the right idea to try to attempt it. But I think that gives a metaphor for what's still going on there. There's an inability for folks to want to take responsibility for what happened. That's part of the issue. And we have that here as well. So I think here, she was, yeah. Sorry if I was long-winded on that. Did I answer your question at all in the process? Okay.
I am curious about the severe water shortages and water restrictions in Cape Town. I've
Yes.
been reading about,
Yes.
and it sounds quite bad. And I'm curious if you anticipate that it will have an effect on your trip this August.
I do anticipate if the rains don't come, it will have an effect. We'll probably have to purchase bottled water, which is readily available in good times. I'm sure it's going to be very expensive, right? So we're depending on the rains. The rainy season has not yet come, and we're hoping that after 2 bad years, they'll get a good year of rain. We'll see. But if they don't, then yeah, we're going to have to adjust to it. I think the adjustment can be made in South Africa because of the infrastructure that's there. I mean, 99% of the people in Cape Town have running water in their homes and that type of thing, right? So they have water, and they have the infrastructure to get water to these areas that don't have it. That's possible. But it will possibly add additional costs, and it's also going to maybe limit our water usage. We've had that experience already, even during normal times when I take students there. They don't understand that when you wash dishes, you just don't cut on the spigot and let the water run. So we were staying at the house of a middle-class family in a township, and water is very valuable in the good times. And so they went in the kitchen to help the matron of the house wash dishes. But they did it the American style, right? They wanted to rinse the dishes with a running tap. And so she got really frustrated with them, but she couldn't tell them she's frustrated because that would be impolite because they're her guests. But they noticed she's frustrated, so they came to me, and then I went to her son, and he then came back laughing, and he said, yeah, my mom says you Americans waste water. She couldn't imagine. So what they do is they have 2 basins, right? They wash in one, they rinse in the other. And yeah.
Hi, the land in South Africa, there's 10% white, but own 90% of the land.
Almost, yeah.
And so the new president, which is a member of ANC, is talking now about expropriation of land for agriculture without compensation. And I wanted to know what you, could you elaborate? And I do think the Boers should be giving up that land, just like European settlers should be giving up the land here in the United States.
That's going to be a delicate issue, but just at the level of social justice, you would expect that the resources of the country should be shared amongst the people of a country if it's a multicultural country. With that said, the route that South Africa went on was one that allowed whites to have a disproportionate share, because they've always had a disproportionate share in these towns and cities, right? And then to move towards a gradual transition. The gradual transition is too gradual. It's not working fast enough, and that part of it has to do with, I think, human fear amongst people that if they give up, they're going to lose. They don't. It's a zero-sum type of mentality, and that's held by some of the farmers in South Africa right now. That's not a sustainable attitude, because you have too many young, frustrated males, but people, right, in the society who expect more, right, at this particular time, how many years after independence, since '94. So, yeah. So my thought about it is that it's going to be a bone of contention. It's going to have to still be done intelligently if they're going to kind of accelerate the process, because the underlying reason that they have the process is because the model of just kicking whites out and taking the land did not work well for most African countries. In fact, it's hard to find one where it did. This is one of the contradictions of colonialism. The longer the Europeans stayed in general, the more infrastructure that was developed in the country. Take Kenya, take South Africa, take Zimbabwe as examples, right? And so when you're talking about kicking people out, you have more to lose. I mean, South Africa, for instance, their airport is as nice as SeaTac. Their highways are better than our highways, fewer potholes. I'm talking that traveling between cities and stuff, right? You're talking about a city that has tremendous infrastructure and also mineral wealth, right? And so how to transition it so that the process is accelerated, I think, is the question, because I think the either-or thing is, there's not a lot of good examples that works for the people when you just replace the people with the expertise, right, who haven't taught anybody else to step in their place. This is the thing about South Africa, where you saw the black-on-black violence, if I can call it that, where South Africans were then turning against other immigrants who had come from other places in Africa because they were worse off than the black South Africans in townships. They were moving into black African townships and living in the periphery of a township because that was a better condition than what they had at home. Imagine. There was a violent reaction to that by some people in the townships, right? Not the majority, but some of the workers in the townships. And I think that's an indication of the type of frustration that is there. And if the government is not careful at modulating that, you could have some real problems around people striking out, and I think setting them back from the progress that they've made.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. I would like to ask you about the homestay, so in South Africa.
Yes.
And I would like to know the process of recruitment of those families, and also in terms of the food, if you require some kind of food, or
That's
it's
very
up
good.
to the families, and how long, like the duration of this homestay.
Thank you for that
And also,
question.
if you can talk about the impact of the homestay.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you multiple times for that question. Yeah, so the homestay is a 2-day process. It is always in the same township. It's called Longa Township, and that's where my on-site coordinator is from. He personally knows the families where the students are staying, and he personally contracts with the matron of the house, right, for our stay, and compensates her generously for our stay, right? He also and myself are in proximity, walking distance of all the houses that the students stay at, and we visit those houses. So the students are in a really safe zone. The houses are middle-class homes in the context of a township. So townships are not what we might imagine. There are the folks on the periphery who are really just squatting, and then there's, maybe hundreds of thousands of really poor people. This literally, right? Without electricity and running water. And then at the core of it are the teachers and the nurses and the business people and so forth. They have homes there, right? Still in the townships, and those are the people we stay with. And so they have refrigeration, they have electricity, they have, right, the capacity to ask people if they have allergies, and to modulate the meals that they're giving people. And so that's part of what happens there. So the students are eating foods that they're typically very familiar with when they're in the homestays, and the host families are doing that intentionally. We do go out and eat some local foods and so forth, but not so much in the homestays. The value of the homestays is tremendous, because one of the things that happens is the students are able to shadow the matrons and to do what they do during the day. And I mean, some of them are hospice workers for AIDS patients and that type of thing, and they get to see that, right? Some of them are nurses, and they go around to the community and just attending to people and that type of thing. They get to see that. In addition to that, they get to interact with South Africans in their element. You know, so there's families in their homes, and those families have friends, and so we go out at night and we go to a shebeen, which is like a local bar. It's somebody's living room that's been turned into a bar, is what it is. It's like right? It's a refrigerator. That's all it is. It's a refrigerator with some beer in it, right? We go there, and people are just having a good time on Friday night, and students then will get invited from there to go to a party in the township, right? And they'll be escorted to the party and that type of thing. And so the value of it is tremendous from the standpoint of authentic interactions. We've gone to see a local shaman when we were in one of the townships, right? We had the opportunity to do things like that. So the authentic experiences are tremendous. And then we have gone and eaten outside of the homes in the townships. We also have lectures. While we're during the homestay, the way that I've set it up, I think all but one time, we have an activist from the struggle, Fatma Dike. I don't know, you remember Fatma from your turn? Yeah. And she comes and gives a political lecture to us about the history of that township in the struggle against apartheid. We get that from people. So yeah, that aspect of the program is powerful, but it's also quite safe. We've had situations where we assumed that the matron was going to be home, something came up with her family, and she left. And when we circulated, we realized that she wasn't there, and we moved the student because two women were staying with her, we moved them to another house. So we really pay attention to where the students are, and safety is the first issue. We don't allow students to walk from here to the library by themselves, literally. If they're moving, they move in a group. And that's just for... And it's over security. Some students feel a little bit frustrated by that. They say, these people are so nice, they're so friendly, you're treating them as if they're unsafe. But it's not, it's always that small element. It's not the people in general, it's that small element. So we walk. And South African culture is such that I was told by Moss one time, we were going to go to lunch, and all we had to do is walk maybe from here to the grade school over there. That's how close it was. There's a little grade school across the street. And I said, Moss, we can see it. Why can't we just walk there? And he said, no, I've got to send someone with you. And I said, okay, send someone. So we got like a 6th grader. the kid was, and he walked us, and I was going, Moss, what would he have done if something happened? He said, it wasn't for something to happen. Nothing's going to happen to you. He said, but what you need to be is identified with us as a guest. And that's what that does. All people need to know is that you are a guest of someone in the township, and as a guest, you're sacrosanct. People will not think of looking at you cross, let alone harming you. And that's part of their culture. You've seen that in some areas of the world, right, where people can be at war with one another. You come into their village and they stop and they feed you and serve you tea, and then as soon as you leave, they start shooting at you, right? Okay, so this is the same type of thing without the shooting.
Sound? Okay, this could go on forever, but I was asked to make sure we clear the room by 1:30, so we need to stop. So let's begin by giving this gentleman a great round of applause.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, sir.
And